Hi everyone, welcome. What you see here is my worm bin in which I've got my so-called mixed red worm population living. And a lot of people run a population like this. One of the main retailers that sells worms sells a population that is thought to be this arrangement of worms where there's a combination of red wigglers in the system, European night crawlers, and Indian blue worms. Three species of worms that seem to get along quite nicely, and they kind of complement one another. So like really dark, small, thin worms like this, where the clitellum is barely visible, those would normally be considered as the Indian blue worm. The red wigglers and European night crawlers have very similar appearances, with the exception of the European nightcrawler having a tendency to grow a little bit bigger in size. So I'm not sure if I would be able to differentiate one from the other. I've never considered myself to be very good at doing that in terms of distinguishing one worm species from the other. This is my only bin of mixed red worms, and what we've been doing in here is we've been running a little test, not a test, but a little twist on the way I normally feed. Most of my worm bins generally get stuff directly out of my freezer, so the foods that they've been fed are frozen. But we decided to give a little something a try in here, which was to try feeding these worms foods that have not yet been first frozen. So the stats are going to start rolling now, so this might seem super geeky, but I did make myself a little quiz because I came down here without my little green information board, but I did try to commit to my short-term memory a number of bits of info about this system, and I wanted to challenge myself to see if I can actually rattle off these bits. But I did make myself a little quiz sheet to say, these are the information bits I'd like to share. Let's see if I can pull this off. The age of the bin is now 147 days of age, which translates into 21 weeks. The estimated population size in here, 3,610 worms, and that's an estimate that we arrived at together. I just average everyone's estimates together. The number of feedings has been 12 so far, lucky 13 going in today, and we didn't start out by feeding the non-frozen foods. So the first two were frozen, and then this will be the 10th non-frozen feeding. And it's been 14 days now, 2 weeks since we last fed, and I think I got all the information bits correctly. If I fouled any of it up, I guess I could flash some bits of info on the screen as corrections in case I did mess anything up. So let's start digging in. I was a little bit hard pressed to find non-frozen stuff in the kitchen, but I looked in the refrigerator and there was a cucumber beginning to spoil. So I hacked off the half of it that looked not so good, and hopefully the other half of it will get eaten before it too spoils. So we'll see about that. A latecomer was a tomato I spotted, which was really starting to dry out, and it looks like it's already developing a little bit of mold. Underneath the cucumber, we could see a few chunks of radish even, and a staple food item, which definitely classifies as non-frozen, never gets frozen, is the coffee. And I got my worm chow off on the side too. I've prepared a replacement top covering newspaper because that one we pulled off in the beginning there looked quite chewed up already. Even though it came in brand new during the last feeding, it does seem like the worms have done a number on it. So that, along with those napkins, as well as the old feeding zone indicator, are all going to go in as supplementary bedding to complement today's feeding. I got to tell you, the moisture level in here seems a bit high. The stuff is so muddy, it's clumping together and it's sticking to my glove. The The furnace is starting to run less and less now that we're in spring and the weather is warming up now. So the reduction in the amount of forced hot air blasting through the house now that it's spring is resulting in less dry air in the house. And the dry air in the house during the winter has a tendency to really suck the moisture out of my systems. So I do my best to prevent excess drying of my bins by covering up pretty thoroughly with plastic almost everywhere. But I might have to start transitioning to more porous and breathable coverings and allow the systems to kick off what might be considered by some to be a little bit excess moisture. And man, oh man, have we got... I tried to grab all of them. Ugh, now my clean hand is dirty. That's alright, I got a napkin to tidy up with. Sometimes it is just fun to lift the worms up out of their system and check them out. Perhaps while we're checking them out, I could try to use my my napkin over here to clean up my hand. So now, one of the non-frozen foods that we gave them way back when was the stalk of some Brussels sprout. One of them appeared to just get gobbled up 1, 2, 3, and it went to pieces, and that's what some of these longer strands of fibrous material are. And there was another one that was just holding out really good, and perhaps the only reason it was holding out so good was because I didn't really help it along in terms of breaking down. And I thought I caught a sense of its smell a moment ago, because I'm not that familiar with feeding Brussels sprout stalks, so I was a little bit caught off guard when I first started noticing the fairly distinct and rather foul odor of this this gooey gel-like goop. I don't know how to refer to it otherwise. That's inside one of these things. So that's part of the reason well, it's starting to goo out right there. See that stuff right there? That kind of weird gel? That stuff stinks. And I'm right there. I'm squeezing more of it out now and stinking up my wormery even further by doing so. It is always interesting to see how worms like to crawl down into hollow objects. They create a little bit of a mob scene. And they're doing that with this stalk of Brussels sprout. And I've been tempted to just kind of help that piece of Brussels sprout stalk along a little bit by possibly breaking it up a little bit, but it is always interesting to see how it breaks down on its own, especially here since we're not freezing any of the things that we're giving them. I'll tell you, I was a little bit skeptical about the estimated worm count that lives in here, but sometimes when I get down into this system and I just see the massive number of worms that occupy it, I start to regain faith in our in our estimate that perhaps there is in fact that many worms living in here, which is awesome to see, by the way, because this poor population of worms was on the brink of dying out entirely once when I was running them in a single bin, as I am doing here again. And then I had a wicked die out. Like almost all the poor worms got wiped out because of something, and I don't know what, but I was left with virtually none of these worms remaining, but I was able to establish a new bin with a very, very small quantity of surviving worms. And then in the previous system that they occupied, we started out by placing them into a very small container, and then when their numbers had grown to a fairly respectable size, we proceeded to upgrade them to a somewhat larger container, and now they actually occupy one of these bus boxes that I classify as large, and it is a little bit larger than most of my bus bins. It's a little bit wider. It's got the same length and depth as all my other bus boxes, but these, I've got a few of them, are slightly bigger. So now, let's see. Let's proceed with dropping in their feeding. Ugh, so this piece of cucumber was really so gross already. You could see what I was seeing underneath the plastic. I tried to hack off a portion of the cucumber on the other end that looked like it was still kind of holding out, but this piece of it was so mushy and gross that I just didn't dare try removing it from the plastic. I figured that would just be best done here as part of us applying it to the system. So I'm just kind of glad to see that it came out without making a huge mess. Another thing that's classifying as not frozen are some of these interesting little pastries, which I have a tendency to just let them sit in water to try to help them along a little bit, since they're pretty much so dried out that they're like as brittle as a rock, and if I didn't soak them, they would just sit in here. I mean, I do like the idea, just the same way we were sort of working the ends of that Brussels sprout stalk, kind of pushing on it a little bit and kind of trying to deform it a little bit. I do feel like at the same time I'm helping it a little bit by crushing it and breaking it and squeezing it a little bit. So I thought I would do the same with this chunk of gourd. Most of the other stuff I don't think needs that sort of help. It is interesting to see some of the not frozen cantaloupe melon they got 2 weeks ago still holding out. I usually do expect to see the rind, the outer skin of the cantaloupe, but finding a little bit of the actual fleshy melon on there is a little bit interesting, a little bit unexpected. So in the beginning I was selectively choosing things that I thought would go very slowly in the worm bins. Then I kind of came to the realization that if we keep that up, we're just going to keep ending up with tons and tons of leftovers, which are just going to take forever to all break down. So that's the reason our non-frozen feedings lately have been stuff that I believe are going to go a little bit more quickly. The cucumber, the tomato, and you know that tomato, I don't know, it's like, it does seem like if we were to puncture the side of it, it stands a better chance at being seen by the worms as a food item rather than just sitting there encapsulated in its skin. So I do sometimes find that if I put in tomato and don't break the skin, it just sits there as an unbreached vegetable object. Possibly sometimes even over the course of many feedings until I finally break them open. So now there are all kinds of interesting things in here. Here's like the half of a seed of a avocado. Sometimes I try to see if I could break it, because these things do break pretty easily after they've had a chance to kind of decompose a little bit, but it just doesn't want to give. I think I even tried that last time. So we're going to now cover up the feeding zone using material from the outer edges. Hopefully we can get things leveled off here pretty nicely, and at the same time we're just going to give ourselves the opportunity to see how things on the outer edges look here in this system. So I must say, this was a fun check-in. It is always kind of interesting to barge in on a bunch of worms that are enjoying the last meal that you gave them, especially when they turn out in great numbers like that. Here and there I'm spotting a little blueberry. Some of these blueberries too, I wonder if they would benefit from being squished when I encounter them. That was part of what they got last time, was just some not frozen blueberry, cantaloupe, blueberry. I think they even got a couple of those biscuits that we just gave them now. And, you know, I am tempted to just leave off the plastic coverings, possibly swap it out with cardboard instead, because I'm not a real big fan of seeing things get this muddy in my worm bins. It just seems to me like it's gonna stay like a clump, and if there's even possibly within the clump still some stuff that I'd like for the worms to be working on, they're not even gonna know it's there, and they're just gonna pass it by over and over again. And it seems like it would be nice if the material in the system flowed a little bit better rather than just being this muddy. So I don't know, maybe we'll position the nice replacement top covering piece of newspaper that I've got for them here, and then maybe we'll just leave off the plastic coated cardboard covering that normally rests out here on top, because I think it would benefit this system to air out a little bit and dry off some. And I mean, perhaps it would even be enough to leave just this newspaper as the top covering for them. I mean, it would result in the system getting a little bit dry on the top surface, and who knows, that might even actually help us see a reduction in all those springtails we saw in here. So just a quick glimpse on the top covering to see if we've stranded any wormies. I'll take another closer look at this later just to be sure, and perhaps I'll even come back at some point to scrape off the castings from that plastic and return it to the bin, as well as doing a little bit better job getting this material off my glove too. But all that stuff is boring. I'm not going to keep around for that. Before I go really quick, let me just say thank you. Thank you so much for watching. Hopefully you enjoyed the video. If you did, as always, please don't forget to leave me a quick thumbs up before you go. That's always really appreciated. And if you haven't done so already, please also consider subscribing to the channel. That's very much appreciated as well. All right, everyone, have a great day. Thanks for watching. Bye now.